Legal Eagle has lied about Disney and the fight with Ron DeSantis. He's made huge lies regarding what the problem is and, frankly, what the law is and what the law states. And today we're going to break it down, not from the perspective of a California lawyer who knows nothing about Florida law or nothing about property at all whatsoever. No. We're going to break it down from someone in that area with that expertise who is a specialist in special districts, who created, destroyed, maintained special districts, and issued millions of dollars in bond debt, exactly the same in type and character to the type of bond debt levied by Reedy Creek, the former Disney district, which is now the Central Florida Tourism Oversight Board. So we're going to talk about that today and exactly how Legal Eagle Devin Stone lied. Now, let's start out with this. First of all, I'm Andrew Esquire. This is the Legal Mindset. We teach you to be your own judge. And when I first started on YouTube, I noticed a lot of people tended to be stuck in this trend of Trump derangement syndrome. And I understand that Legal Eagle is indeed one of those attorneys. He's one of those people on YouTube who's stuck in Trump derangement syndrome. And every time you look at his channel, and we'll pop over here and look at it right now, you can see he's a bit obsessed with Trump and Republicans. And I get it. Look, he's a Californian. He comes from California, very deeply embedded in that strong leftist culture, which teaches you have to be triggered by Trump. You have to be triggered by anything on the right, including DeSantis. So we're going to come after Trump. We're going to have to come after DeSantis. But the problem is he is a lawyer. He's an actual lawyer. I'll give him that. And people come to him and watch his channel thinking he has some sort of authority, thinking he knows what he's talking about. But on this issue particularly, he's lied on other things. He's made misrepresentations. But on this one, he is not just way off the park. He is off the reservation regarding Florida and regarding Disney and DeSantis. His latest video, after one going off on Trump, is how Disney outsmarted Ron DeSantis. But in that video, there's no proof of any of that, or really anything that Disney did to outsmart Ron DeSantis. Now, what does he talk about in those videos? What are his main 2 points and how they outsmarted and tricked Ron DeSantis? Well, his first point about Reedy Creek, which, by the way, Reedy Creek, just as a primer, so y'all know, Reedy Creek is the special district that used to govern all of the Disney properties. It used to contain a large amount of land. It was put together by land owned by separate Disney entities. All that property was connected. And through an act of legislation, through something passed by the state, they were given control within their borders, essentially control to do almost whatever they wanted. They really didn't have to follow any regulations at all. They could raise ridiculous taxes. They had the power to build a nuclear plant. I mean, just really crazy amounts of power within the boundaries of the special district. A special district, though, and this is very important, is a creature of the state. So if you think about power, and this is a very important dynamic, something that Devin misses here, is that the power of a special district is given to it. It has no implicit power. Now, when we analyze the power of cities versus the state, in some states, cities do have any power that's not expressly reserved by the state. But in this case, that's not the case. Special districts, this is very important, only have the powers that are given to them. Unless they are specifically given a power, it is presumed they do not have that power and cannot do it. The specific language has to be there to allow them to do whatever they're going to do. And whenever a special district is created, much like the dozens of special districts I personally created in Florida during my time creating special districts there on the behalf of large corporations, much akin to Disney, although not Disney themselves. I never represented Disney, but other large corporations. When you create these, they have specific powers, and you cannot go outside those lines. You can't go outside the boundary of the district. You've got to stay within the lines. You've got to color within the lines. So what does he miss here? Well, first of all, look, I understand he's a civil litigator. And a lot of people, they knock on attorneys because they say, well, attorneys, you're not in court or you're not practicing court. No, certainly he's been in court. But that's the problem. He's never done property law. He's never practiced in Florida and certainly knows nothing about bond issuances and special districts. This is a very small niche, which frankly only a handful of people know about. And what he went off of, one of the 2 points he went off for the first point was on the bonds. And this is an old issue that I debunked months ago in my late videos, but I want to bring it up again because he relies on a faulty article by an attorney in Orlando called Jacob Schumer, which was issued way back when, 2022, called The Contractual Impossibility of Unwinding Disney's Reedy Creek. Now, this article, let me just point out here a couple things about the article itself, which I've read multiple times, and about Jacob Schumer himself. Now, first of all, I used to practice in Central Florida, and I actually personally know Jacob Schumer. He's quite a nice guy. However, 2 things that you should know about Jacob. Number one, he does not practice any sort of law to do with special districts. He has never created or destroyed a special district. He doesn't know anything about special district law. He doesn't govern special districts. It's not his area of practice. In fact, when I was an attorney in Orlando, Jacob would ask me about special districts. He came to me for advice. So I found it hilarious to see him writing this article and to see so many people and so many hacks relying on it. And I guess Disney was grasping at straws there. But just like I wouldn't ask a California lawyer, Legal Eagle, to know anything about Florida law because he doesn't, and therefore just felt the need to lie about it, much like he lies on a regular basis about Trump. But I wouldn't rely on Jacob either because he really doesn't do that. That's not what he does. That's not his specialty at all. He really deals more with contractual suits, more civil litigation type things, not specifically special districts and bonds. That's something that is very specific. Attorneys just work on that their entire life. That's what they do. And it's important to specialize in that because the punishment for fucking up on bonds is extreme. And we will get to that. We'll explain exactly how the punishment is bad for this. But Jacob's other issue with him is he's a huge Disney fan. Yeah, he's one of those folks that goes there, puts on the ears, and goes there very often. When I was there, I think he was going to Disney every other week. He is a huge Disney fan, annual pass holder. So he's got that sort of pixie dust commitment to Disney. And that's a problem with a lot of people, particularly in Central Florida. Another factor is when you've got a law firm there, you're a member of a law firm, they're trying to jockey for Disney work. They're trying to jockey for Disney money. And a lot of the organizations that Jacob is a part of, some of which I formerly was a part of, receive money from Disney. So there's a financial interest there, a personal interest there, which is why I think he came out and penned this article in the first place. But that being said, this argument and basing it in contract law and talking about the bonds in terms of contract law is completely flawed because bonds don't operate purely on a contractual basis. They operate in terms of securities law, finance law. And what he was trying to say was, well, because in the original act, it says the district shall have these bonds paid off before they're dissolved. Well, because of that, right, and because of that specific clause in the original act, that's a contract between the state and Reedy Creek, and the state can't break that contract. First of all, that's a novel theory. The power comes from the state, like we talked about. So the state can do what it wants and feel free to rewrite that contract at any time. That's the state's power. The state has the power, not the entity. Number two, Jacob doesn't know bond and security law in Florida. Under bond and security law in Florida, those bonds cannot become the general obligation of the taxpayers of the state of Florida or of Orange County. That was one of the fears that he was drumming up and many other people were drumming up, that these bonds would suddenly become due by all Floridians and all Floridians would suddenly have a $30,000, $50,000 hike in their property taxes. It was going to go crazy. That was completely debunked. That is against Florida case law. It's very clear on that. And if either Legal Eagle or Jacob knew that, they would have said that, but they didn't, and they were acting, and I think in both cases in bad faith, because they chose not to ask people that knew, but just go out and write a position puff piece, to go out and shill for Disney and lie for Disney to make a point in favor of the Diz, in favor of the mouse. Now, that being said, there are issues with the bonds, but the issues with the bonds go against Disney. And we're going to get into that when I talk later about why DeSantis won. But let's bring up the second point that Legal Eagle brings up, which he somehow tries to frame as an own of Disney owning DeSantis. So he talks about the King Charles clause in the term section of the covenants. Once again, I've talked about this in a prior video, but I'll mention it again. That clause is effectively useless. Look, if the whole act, if everything they did was invalid, right? If it was invalid action, just as a whole, it doesn't matter what the term is. If everything is thrown out, some rule against perpetuities crap isn't really going to matter at all. And furthermore, if there was an invalid phrase or clause, what you do in Florida is you just amend that out and you just go with the standard rule, and whether it's the rule against perpetuities, which is a wait and see approach, or whatever else the judge decides to enact. Now, that just understanding TLDR, that King Charles language is all just puffery. It's all just something funny, something people wanted to lull and say DeSantis was owned, but really there's no own in that, because those homeowners covenants are invalid. Here is why, and there's many reasons why they are invalid, but I think the most important reason why is a government cannot delegate out all of its governmental authority. It can't give that away. And you certainly can't give that away to a homeowners association, which does not have the power to enact those governmental authorities. So for example, just imagine this. Just imagine you lived in the city of Los Angeles, right? I pity you, right? But you lived in the city of Los Angeles, and there's a small homeowners association. And the city of Los Angeles said, within the boundaries of that homeowners association, you get to do everything we do, police, fire, everything. You get to do it all within this. We're not doing anything, and we cannot revoke that power. That would be crazy. That would be Mad Max. You'd have insane things possibly going on within the boundaries of that homeowners association. Because of that, there's a huge interest in that never happening under the law, and governments not giving their powers to private associations, private homeowners associations, because they could do relatively unconscionable things. Remember, back in the day, homeowners associations were used essentially to do all those naughty things they don't allow, all those sexist, racist, ageist, all those other restrictions. Yeah, those are were enforced in the past by homeowners associations. I know Legal wouldn't like that, right? So yes, that I think as a whole, those covenants are going to be suspect. But here's why Ron DeSantis has actually already won. And there's three huge reasons why Disney lost, and Legal does not want to accept that. Number one, and this is probably one of the things that I think has gone underdocumented, is Disney was hiding the public records of Reedy Creek. Now, it's very important to understand, okay, what is a public record? Now, in Florida, the definition is actually very broad. A public record, and this is a great presentation on this, but in Florida is all documents, papers, letters, maps, tapes, photographs, films, sound recordings, data processing software, or other material, regardless of physical form, characteristics, or means of transmission. So anything capturing information. So this can be emails. And this is very important. If you're doing an email and it's about official business, read that second line. If it's made pursuant to a law or ordinance or in connection with a transaction of official business, intended to perpetuate, communicate, or formalize knowledge of some kind. So that's very broad language. So if it's about Disney business, or rather Reedy Creek business, and Disney was orchestrating that, that needs to come to light. And we found out through these calls that Disney was really pulling the strings all along. And I knew that, and I've been saying that for a long time. In my dealings with Reedy Creek, we had Disney CC'd on the emails, right? So my emails that I personally sent to Reedy Creek for approval by a government had to go through Disney VPs, had to be approved by Disney. It was always an alter ego of Disney. And when they get those emails, that will become crystal clear. So Disney is pulling a Hillary, is scuttling those emails, is pulling them away, and is absolutely scared, terrified of them coming to light. And Ron DeSantis and the Attorney General are coming after those right now. That is a huge loss, because Florida has some of the strictest open government transparency and sunshine laws in the state. That's actually how you get most Florida man stories, is because we have open government. We believe in transparency in Florida. And that's why those records need to be public. But Disney is trying to hide them. They do not want you to see that, hey, this was just a puppet. Now, why is that so important? Why is it so important that they hide that? Well, remember the bonds? I said the bonds are a reason. Yes, the reason number 2 of 3 as to why DeSantis already won. And that's because the bonds, which you can look up on EMMA, which is the Electronic Municipal Market Access System. You can just look this up, emma.msrb.org. You can type in Reedy Creek right here, and you'll pull up all of those bonds on EMMA. Now, the important thing is, on almost all of those bonds, they had to make disclosures, bond disclosures. How do I know that? Because I was drafting, editing, writing these disclosures. I reviewed hundreds of these bond disclosures, issuing hundreds of millions of dollars in bond funding for infrastructure across Central Florida, including right up on the boundaries and all surrounding Disney. So I know more than anybody else, more than Schumer, more than Legal Eagle, about these bonds. And you need to guarantee in those bonds, make a promise to the bondholders that you are a public entity. And this was something that they did. Reedy Creek, the counsel for Reedy Creek, and the bond counsel made guarantees that Reedy Creek was a public entity, not that they were an alter ego. If they were a mere alter ego of Disney, if they were just Disney in a different costume, that's not permissible under either Florida law or federal law, frankly. And that is a huge violation and could end up getting Disney in hot water and the former Reedy Creek officials, as well as potential even some counsel, in trouble for these disclosures if they knew that it was an alter ego all the time. They promised these bondholders, when these people, these bondholders, these are lending millions of dollars, and they're basing it upon the fact that this is a public entity. Why? Because public entities get a lower rate. They can actually issue tax-free bonds, right? So on those tax-free bonds, when you say, hey, we're a public entity, they're guaranteed that, because if you lose that status, you got to pay back taxes. You got to pay it all back. So that is a huge loss here, potential securities fraud, and an absolute blowout in terms of Ron uncovering and pushing towards potential criminal charges even for Disney. But let's move on to number 3. And this is the biggest one. And this is the point where Legal Eagle really, really was deceptive. At the exact same time as he publishes his video to cover for Disney, to lie for them, the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District passed a resolution granting supreme authority over Reedy Creek. And this is what they don't understand. And this is what people who understand bond law, special districts, understand more than people like Legal Eagle or Schumer. All the power, as I said, is derived from the state and the authorizing statute. When Reedy Creek became the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, the old act, the old Reedy Creek Act went away. It was replaced by the new act. And the thing is, that old act, the act that was passed in the 60s, it was grandfathered in. So there were so many pieces of legislation that were passed between the 60s and now. Florida was still developing in the 60s. People were still moving down to Florida. It was nowhere near as developed as it was now. It was swampland, but it ain't swampland anymore. And since it's developed, we've advanced our laws. We've come up to date with a lot of our laws and our regulations. And they got away with, under that old act, not obeying many of the regulations that have been passed since then. But guess what? There were many things that are able to give them more authority, the state and the entity more authority. And because those homeowner covenants, those covenants that were passed by the Reedy Creek Board, tried to delegate Reedy Creek's authority, they were not the new board under the new rules and the new laws. They could not say anything pertaining to the new rules and laws that have been passed in the past 40 years, one of which is the ability to constitute a local planning agency. This was adopted after the Reedy Creek Act, and this allows a designation of a local planning agency, which essentially has oversight over the district in terms of what it's going to develop in the future, what it's going to build, land use. So in this way, they've implemented something that Reedy Creek couldn't delegate. Even if those homeowners covenants, the ones, the King Charles covenants, all that, even if Disney's covenants are found okay, DeSantis still would win under this. Disney is going to be forced to fight this in court. And until then, this is going to stand. It's highly unlikely they're going to be able to touch this because, as I said, these were laws passed in that interim, in that period between the 60s and 2022, 2023. So this is why, because of all these reasons, that DeSantis is going to win here. Guys, quite simply, why would anyone believe that a company and a special district, both of which are subject to the law and rules of a state, could win a battle against a state? Absolutely delusional to believe that an entity that gains all of its power from the state could beat the state. They could just pass an act of legislation which nullifies everything that was done. It's once again, it blows my mind that they can even think of this or think to do this and win this battle in the long run. DeSantis, the state government, which is firmly in Republican control, is not going to take the L here when it comes to a small leftist company and their sham entity, which has now been disbanded, right? Fighting against the people and the will of the elected populace. It's simply not going to work. And anyone who says anything else is delusional, including those people that are saying that Disney's going to move out of Florida. That's crazy, guys. Can you imagine them putting Spaceship Earth on the back of a truck? Not going to happen. The land doesn't exist anywhere else in the United States. If you like this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Leave a comment on this video. If you disagree, let me hear it. But I hope you make some better arguments than Legal Eagle.